Díomh againn uisle agus fáilte. Hello and welcome. Is Misha Amy the Crafty Kyla, and I am an Irish pagan witch and historian in training. I make content about Irish history, folklore, food and magic. Today, as you've probably guessed from the title of the video, I will be talking about the history of Pride and LGBTQ+ rights in Ireland. So as you probably know, June is Pride Month, at least in the US. June is Pride Month, but in Ireland, Pride is actually celebrated all summer long. So Ireland is much smaller than the United States. Our population is much smaller, and therefore our LGBTQ+ community is also smaller. So instead of just celebrating Pride in the month of June, we have Pride festivals throughout the summer in June, July and August. So that means that if you are part of the community or you are an ally, you can travel all around Ireland all summer celebrating Pride. There's also safety and strength in numbers, so the community tends to support Pride everywhere. So for example, Pride in Dublin Pride is usually the last weekend of June. Mayo and Trans Pride are in July, and Waterford and Galway Pride are in August. Obviously there's more Pride festivals than just that, but those are just examples. So while Pride is definitely influenced by the Stonewall riots in the late 1960s in the US, the Irish LGBTQIA+ community has its own history in Ireland and its own struggle and its own story. And I hope to tell that story today. Now, this video is not a comprehensive history by any means of the Irish LGBT struggle, but I hope to touch on the main points and give some context about what was happening in Ireland for the last 50 years in terms of the community and how it has grown, evolved, and how we have gotten recognition. I will be doing future videos on historical gay icons in Ireland, so do make sure that you're subscribed to the channel and you have notifications on for those in the future. And as always, I will leave further reading and resources in the description below, and I'll make references to certain articles throughout this video, and you can find the articles linked below so you can read them yourself. While this isn't a comprehensive history, I did put a lot of work into this. I looked at the Irish newspaper archives, the queer archive as well. I've also used many secondary sources in my research for this video. I have spent quite a lot of time, longer than I usually would spend on videos, researching this because it is very important to me to get the information correct and to give as much context as is possible in a YouTube video. I am going to also give content warnings because while researching this video, I myself had to take a number of breaks. I was getting angry, I was getting frustrated at what I was seeing, and also certain things that happened this week in particular made me need to take some mental health breaks. But because the history of Pride and the history of queer people, gay people, trans people, it's not all sunshine and rainbows all the time, this video will have some heavy topics. This video will contain the following topics, so please take a second to take care of your mental health. The following content warning is also noted in the description box below if you need to read it there too. In this video, the subject matter will touch on homophobia, transphobia, and related discrimination, violence, assault, and murder of LGBT+ people, including mention of self-unaliving or death by suicide, assault involving stabbing, and death by asphyxiation due to inhalation of blood. Not graphic details, but just so you're forewarned. Criminalisation of queer existence and anti-LGBT+ legislation, as well as anti-LGBT+ propaganda, will also be touched on. Conversion therapy, abortion bans, and the general fight for basic human rights and bodily autonomy against unjust laws and systems that prohibit them, including Supreme Court justice rulings that aren't actually just or fair. I started scripting this video prior to recent events in the United States, so understandably, if you're not in a headspace for this video, you can add it to your watch list for later, and please mind yourself. I have had to delay working on this video for a few days for those reasons. So whether you watch the video now or you watch it later, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy it. I hope it is informative. And without further ado, let's get into it. So as you probably know, the Stonewall riots lasted from the 28th of June to the 3rd of July 1969, and they happened in Greenwich Village in New York City, starting in Ireland in the 1970s. After the Stonewall riots happened in New York, a number of groups started popping up more and more. In October 1973, a group of 10 men and women met in Trinity in Dublin and established the sexual liberation movement. Many of these members would go on to become prominent Irish gay rights activists. And 8 months later, on the 24th of June 1974, these 10 people marched from Stephen's Green to the British Embassy to protest Ireland's anti-homosexual legislation. This legislation criminalised homosexuality under the Offences Against Persons Act, which is legislation that dated back to the Victorian period. Homosexuality, specifically sex between gay men, had been outlawed since the late 1800s, and this was under Section 61 and 62 of the Offences Against the Person Act, which is dated 1861, and also Section 11 of the Criminal Law Amendment Act, which is dated 1885. Section 61 dealt with the act of buggery, which was punishable under Irish law with life in prison. Section 62 dealt with attempts and assaults on a man for committing the act of buggery, a crime which held a maximum penalty of 2 years in prison. Section 11 also carried a maximum sentence of 2 years, and that related to the public or private commission or attempts to procure any man for an act of indecency with another man. From all the reading I've done of this, and I've seen it commented by a couple of gay activists as well at the time, and in various letters to the editor in papers, but lesbians seemed to not exist at this time, or at least their existence was completely overlooked. But no matter how many people denied their existence or criminalized it, gay people existed. Earlier that year, in April 1974, the Queen's University in Belfast, their Gay Liberation Society, had established a CARA, or what they called CARA, a peer support telephone line to help connect gay individuals and people identifying as homosexual with each other, to give peer support, connect and establish friendships, and just really establish community. As was reported in the Evening Herald, people from all over Ireland, the island of Ireland, were calling the service to find support, to connect with others, and the service was completely overwhelmed. An extract from that article reads, "At the beginning of April, the Gay Liberation Society in Queen's University, Belfast, set up CARA, an information and befriending service for homosexual men and women, and advertised a telephone number people could ring," the statement said. "Phone calls have been jamming the switchboard in students' unions for hours each day, according to the society. Some calls have been from as far away as Cork. Most of the callers want to meet and to talk to other homosexuals, or gays as they call themselves. After operating for just a fortnight, the service was coping with 100 calls a day," the statement added. "The necessary manpower was just not available, but the need for a service was demonstrated, and the Students' Union and the Society are now seeking a premises outside the union to set up a 24-hour service." The Gay Liberation Society also advertised in newspapers like the Belfast Newsletter to promote their meetings that were held every Thursday, and to also invite people to those open meetings, or to write in confidence to their PO box. It was around this time as well that the Tel-A-Friend, that's TEL for telephone a friend, which would develop into the Gay Switchboard, which was a service similar to CARA, which was established in Dublin. Tel-A-Friend was the first confidential information and counselling service available to homosexual individuals in the Republic of Ireland. From 1974 to 1978, it was housed in Parnell Square, which was also where the Irish gay rights movement was established. And then in 1979, it moved to the Hirschfield Centre in Temple Bar, which I'll talk more about later. From the beginning, Tel-A-Friend struggled to advertise its presence and service, with publications citing the 1861 and 1885 Criminalisation Act, which prohibited homosexuality. There were some exceptions to this, with the likes of Hot Press and In Dublin electing to advertise Tel-A-Friend services, but by and large, services either declined or the vast majority didn't actually even respond to requests to advertise. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, CARA in Belfast had received public funding, whereas Tel-A-Friend in Dublin did not. And this is despite efforts from the Tel-A-Friend community reaching out to the Minister for Social Protection. Because they were providing a social service, a social support service, both their requests for funding were denied. And this was in 1981 and 1985 when the AIDS crisis was really emerging. And this really highlights just how adamant the Irish state was about turning away from LGBT rights, LGBT needs, and the struggles facing the community. So Tel-A-Friend had to rely on its own fundraising and also funds from the National Gay Federation. An article written by Gay Community News, which I will link below, goes into more detail on the history of the Tel-A-Friend service. And that article also talks about an undercover journalist in 1985 calling the hotline to see if they were trying to convert people to homosexuality. In an article in the Sunday Independent in 1985, a journalist has called the hotline and is looking to find out what kind of supports they're offering, and seems very surprised in the article to find out that Tel-A-Friend was a friendship hotline. It was there to connect other homosexual people with each other, to help and support each other, and to give counselling, and not try to force people to become homosexual, as was clearly the fear-mongering that was happening at the time. Throughout the 1970s, there were a lot of outspoken protests and addressing of discrimination faced by homosexual people in Ireland, both in the Republic and in Northern Ireland. In December of 1974, members of the Gay Liberation Society in Belfast protested because Gay News, a homosexual news publication, was banned from libraries. And I also found various different letters to the editor complaining and pointing out the discrimination and the biased views of various publications and how they were reporting on homosexuals at the time. In a letter to the editor in The Independent in January 1975, Mr. Fred Johnston highlights how discriminatory some of the reporting in a previous issue of the paper was. The letter references the visit of Dr. Franklin Edward Kameny, who had come over on a visit to Ireland. Dr. Kameny was a prominent astronomer and also US gay rights activist who in 1957 had lost his job because he was homosexual. The letter itself denounces the lack of journalistic standards displayed in previous issues of The Independent, specifically on the reporting of gay rights, and a previous article that had printed with the title, "Want the Law Bent for Gay People." Fred, who was speaking as a journalist himself, was pointing this out because while that may seem like a funny play on words as a title for an article, it completely lacked journalistic standards. The letter also highlights the changes at a societal level and pointing out that the Catholic Church no longer has the influence it once did in Ireland. Fred also highlights class discrimination with citing that people who were less well off were more likely to face discrimination. 1975 in Ireland also saw the beginning of the Campaign for Homosexual Law Reform, a campaign that saw Mary McAleese on board as a legal advisor and also Mary Robinson. Both of those women would later become presidents of Ireland. On the 11th of May 1975, I found an article in the Sunday Independent which was reporting on outrage from Dublin publicans or pub owners for being listed in Gay News as gay-friendly spaces, or at least spaces where gay people would congregate. The article reads that the management of a number of Dublin pubs are furious about the listing of their premises in a homosexual newspaper. 5 licensed premises in the Grafton Street area are named in the London publication Gay News, which describes itself as Europe's largest circulation newspaper for homosexuals. One of the owners of the pubs was outraged, saying, "We are not a gay pub. There is no evidence that a significant number of our patrons are homosexuals," and that they would be seeking legal advice to try and sue the newspaper. A quote from another owner reads, "We would prefer if they did not come in, but they're in a minority. This is a public house and people have certain rights. We cannot bar them unless there is any misconduct on the premises." This never happened. So it was perfectly alright for people to have rights once they weren't waving those rights in your face. While that's still homophobic, you're seeing some kind of move on a societal level of even admitting that gay people have rights. The following weekend to this, in the Sunday Independent, there were 2 replies to this article being printed. And those letters to the editor read, "Sir, I had hoped to allow the report, Sunday Independent, 11th of May 1975, about certain pubs in Dublin being popular with a gay clientele to recede into oblivion. However, on reflection and prompted by the indignation of members and friends of the IGRM, the Irish Gay Rights Movement, I wish to restore some balance by making the following points. 1. It should be unnecessary to state that good businessmen and especially proprietors of public houses would not show preference for or discriminate against anyone because of their political or religious beliefs, marital status, or sexual preferences. After all, bigotry and oppression of minorities only occur in other administrations, never in the Republic. We doubt if anyone would be foolish enough to put the sign heterosexuals only outside his place of business. We would allow the income tax collector to do so. How could one differentiate? Homosexuals, men and women, come from all backgrounds, all age groups, all jobs and vocations, married with families as well as single. Some 5 to 10% of the inhabitants of this planet are exclusively or predominantly homosexual. This percentage does not include occasional or singular deep emotional and sexual involvement between members of the same sex. Should society apply this criterion, then all sections of the community would suffer from the exclusion of gay involvement. 2. We are not responsible for gay guides published abroad. These give listings for every country in the world based on visiting correspondence' factual findings. Our only function would be to ask that incorrect information be changed. Your reporter might like to know that a certain Dutch guide announces a popular gay venue near the Lourdes Basilica. Perhaps he can check this out before or after a pilgrimage. Yet again, we must ask for the mature reporting on a subject that touches on more than 200,000 Irish lives. Is this too much to expect? The facts about homosexuality may be less sensational than the fiction, yet all the elements of human life are there. And to the long-suffering gay men and women in Ireland, we say let's close ranks with IGRM to stamp out this caste system under which we are forced to live. IGRM has a non-profit social side as well as a serious undertaking of legal and educational campaigning, and we are non-political. And that is written from Sean J. Connolly, General Secretary of the Irish Gay Rights Movement in Dublin 4. The second letter reads, "Sir, if it was illegal for Gay News to publish the names of 5 public houses with the article cited, then granted permission should have been sought, but the views expressed by the managers in your article just about sum up the attitude of most towards we gay people in Ireland." May I dwell on that last phrase, we gay people? Do you know that we exist? And you know that some of us like to have a drink occasionally? Who knows what other pubs we infiltrate, disguised as, yes, heterosexuals. There is no evidence that a significant number of our patrons are homosexuals, he quotes. I used to disguise myself as heterosexual. I was really very good. Nobody, not even my family, who I am close to and love, knew. Even though I always wanted to make contact with other gay people, I felt safer not going near bars or areas that were thought to be gay. You may be surprised, but lots more homosexuals don't go to gay bars than the ones who do. Why, might I suggest, if they were like me before I discovered the solidarity and warmth of meeting other homosexual women and men in an open social atmosphere, and eventually came out, that they are afraid of the image of gay people. The image is being thrown at us all the time by 2-bit comedians who pose the well-worn, unfunny caricature. The image of homosexuality grows and becomes distorted when children write to problem pages in newspapers and are told, "Don't worry, you probably aren't homosexual." Why are they not taught to feel good about their sexuality? This image is pushed forward by references to these people and the everyday queers. It is upheld by anachronistic laws that make sex between males illegal. As I said, I used to be terrified of the image of the gay person. By the way, discussion on homosexuality usually deals with males because the existence of lesbians is often negated, especially in a gay bar. Could it be that one of the reasons that more homosexuals don't frequent gay bars is the above mentioned, quote, "most people regard it as a bit of a laugh," end quote? Is it a laugh that many of the homosexuals you don't see in your bars live their lives in constant fear? Fear that anyone will find out? Fear that they'll never have a chance for sex and love for another person? Is it a laugh that a 19-year-old boy committed suicide recently because he couldn't face up to his homosexuality and subsequent feelings of isolation. Could yours be the first bar that doesn't discriminate against gay people? Is your bar good enough for me to bring my boyfriend? And that letter is written by Fergus Martin from Booterstown, County Dublin. In reading these responses to that article written in the newspaper in response to reading homophobic rhetoric about bars they probably frequent, you really feel and hear the experience of these men and what life in Ireland is like, what it's like to be constantly presented with an inaccurate caricature of what it means to be homosexual that doesn't align with their own lived experience. And also the culture of shame that was put on people for just existing and having a different sexuality than the majority of people seemed to have. Just over 6 months later, in December of 1975, the Sunday Independent were actually invited to a gay disco in Dublin. The article reports that there is approximately at this time 20,000 gay people in Dublin, and that many of these people are intensely lonely with very little social life and no opportunities to create meaningful relationships. The Irish gay rights movement, led by David Norris, their chairman, had opened a gay disco in their premises in Parnell Square. Anthony Redmond, the journalist, had gone along to see what the crack was. Due to licensing, there was tea, coffee and soft drinks served at these events. No alcohol. There were 2 rooms, one for dancing, one for sitting down, with also the refreshment area. And Redmond reports that people were dancing to Hot Chocolate and Stylistic at the usual ear-splitting volume. Redmond writes that I spoke to one of the organisers who told me that 1,300 people had visited the disco in the past 5 weeks. He explained that the members of the Irish gay rights movement give their time voluntarily to help the running and upkeep of the place. Quote, we are deeply involved in other aspects of homosexual equality, such as organising discussions and meetings, answering letters, and running our head office in Leeson Street. It's a job which demands a lot of commitment and hard work, he said. We have made some progress, but there is a long way to go in the fight for acceptance. We intend to improve this discos and later to open a restaurant there. Redmond also spoke to a couple of the attendees, and he asked one chap what the disco meant to him. And he replied, I travel in from Navan every Friday to come here. I have made a lot of new friends and can't tell how delighted I am about it all. Never knew what it was like to be myself until I came here. You can be yourselves here without being considered queer. Redmond says that it was a happy, jolly atmosphere in the disco and that the feeling of friendship and welcome that was there was truly warming. He also noted that he heard no camp conversation and that nobody looked freakish, which he was doing quite well to not be homophobic up to that point in the article. But he does end the article by saying that as he left, Sean Connolly and David Norris were at the door saying goodnight to all the guests and inviting us to come again. Outside, the world seemed cold and hostile. These kind of articles, and while this is kind of weird reporting where probably the reporters were going in to uncover what these gay discos were like, the fact that they had a good positive experience and then went back to report on it would have helped people to see that this isn't this scary, sinister thing, that being gay wasn't any different than not being gay. It just meant that you were attracted to different people. While we're still very much a long way off actual gay and LGBT rights, this is stepping stones. They're very small baby steps, but we are making very slow progress here in the 70s. By 4 years later, in 1979, the Hirschfield Centre had opened up in Temple Bar. Temple Bar nowadays is a busy tourist spot in central Dublin city, but back in the 70s, it was a very rundown area of Dublin. The Hirschfield Centre was named after a German physician, sexologist, writer, feminist, and gay and transgender activist who had died in 1935. And it became the heart of the Irish gay scene, where people would go to do activism and also to socialise. 1979 also saw Ireland's first Gay Pride Week, and this was held on the 25th of June to the 1st of July in 1979, also coinciding with the 10-year anniversary of the Stonewall riots in the US. The event, which was organised by the National Gay and Lesbian Federation, not only commemorated the 10-year anniversary of Stonewall, but also brought attention to the discrimination that Irish gay people still faced. And while things weren't 100% accepted yet, homosexuality was still illegal, things were starting to look up. However, when we get into the 80s, things kind of start to take a little bit of a step back. So the overall climate, socially, economically in Dublin between 1979 and 1986 wasn't great. It was quite grim. The unemployment rate had risen from 7% to 17%. Almost 500,000 people had emigrated by the end of the 80s. And while that might not seem like a huge amount of people, again, Ireland's population is quite small, and at the time our population was only 3.5 million. Among the young people that were emigrating were a lot of LGBT people emigrating for more accepting cities like London, San Francisco, New York, places where they could live more openly and authentically themselves. Around Dublin, just 5 years after articles had come out complaining about specific bars being named as gay spaces, there were gay safe spaces starting to be established and be more talked about and more widely known. But at the same time, in having these spaces identified, there was a rise in anti-LGBT sentiment, violence, and attacks on a national level against this community. In a quote from Una Mullally's book titled In the Name of Love, The Movement for Marriage Equality in Ireland and Oral History, he says, in 1982, 3 separate killings had a profound impact on the gay community. On the 21st of January 1982, Charles Self, an RTE set designer, left a pub on Duke Street and returned to his home in South Dublin. There he was stabbed to death. He was 33. His killer was never identified. On the 8th of September, John Roach, 29, was stabbed to death in room 26 at the Munster Hotel in Cork. The hotel porter who killed him, Michael O'Connor, 26, said, "Your gay days are over," as he stabbed him. "I had to kill him," he told Gardaí. "He would have ruined my life. He wanted me to become a gay. I said no way, and I killed him." The jury found O'Connor not guilty of murder, but guilty of manslaughter. On the 9th of September that year, Declan Flynn, 31, left a pub in Donnycarney for Fairview Park, a popular cruising spot. The events that unfolded on that night changed Irish history. Declan Flynn was attacked that night in Fairview Park by a gang known as the Rollers. Declan's cause of death was asphyxiation due to inhalation of blood following a criminal assault, as is recorded on his death inquest report. An article, which I will link below, that does go into more graphic detail, is published by Gay Community News, and it goes into further detail on his murder, the investigations, and the trial. As the article describes, the Rollers, who were this gang who were notorious and proudly boasting of their homophobic attacks and aggressive tactics, were known to the Gardaí at the time. Because at the time homosexuality was still illegal, the suspended sentences that his murderers got, and the inaction of the Gardaí to investigate fully and to address the issue before it got to this stage in the months leading up to Declan's death, is not surprising. And while it's not surprising, it is still appalling, unjust, and something needed to be done. In a leaflet that was produced in the 1980s by the Campaign for Rights for Lesbian and Gay Men, a leaflet which was jointly produced by the National Gay Federation, the Dublin Gay Collective, Liberation for Lesbians, the Cork Gay Collective, the Derry Gay Rights Association, the issues regarding police attitudes, legal custody, legal status, violence, social prejudice, destruction of lives, employment, and numbers are highlighted. I will leave a link to a copy of this document, which is available online in the description notes below. In March of 1983, The young men that were charged with the murder of Declan Flynn escaped with suspended sentences, and they returned to family celebrations for not being incarcerated. The gay and lesbian community and their allies reacted with an unprecedented march to Fairview Park. Not only were activists standing up against the violence against the gay community, they were also bringing awareness to a number of other issues facing Irish society at the time, including the Eighth Amendment, which would ban abortion just 6 months later. 8 months after Declan Flynn's death, on the 28th of April 1983, David Norris, who had been the chairman of the Irish gay rights movement, was awaiting a Supreme Court judgment on his case against the state regarding the homosexuality prohibition in the law. In the case against the Attorney General in Ireland, Norris sought to challenge the constitutionality of sections 61 and 62 of the Offence Against the Persons Act and Section 11 of the Criminal Law Amendment Act. Norris previously brought a claim to the High Court which had been rejected. He is quoted saying, "My objective from the very beginning in the early 70s was to get equality. I realised that step number one, if we were to make any progress, was to remove the criminal law. So that was the first objective. My view was that you did it in stages. First of all, you couldn't build civil rights without removing the criminal law." There were 5 judges on the panel. Supreme Court Chief Justice O'Higgins delivered his judgment rejecting Norris's appeal. The second judge, Finlay, agreed with O'Higgins. The third, named Henchy, sided with David Norris. The fourth judge, Griffin, sided with Henchy, denying the appeal. And the fifth judge, McCarthy, sided with Henchy and David Norris. But David Norris still lost with 3 votes to 2. During the hearing, Justice Henchy, who had sided with Norris, referenced a previous case that had been brought in the UK, which was Dudgeon versus the United Kingdom, and that was the first European Court of Human Rights case to decide in favour of gay rights. The case had been taken by one Geoffrey Dudgeon, who had filed the complaint in 1975 and in 1979 had won his appeal. Geoffrey Dudgeon had filed his complaint in 1975 with the European Commission of Human Rights, and in 1979 had a hearing which stated that the complaint should be heard by the European Court of Human Rights. The hearing took place in April of 1981, and later on in November that year, the court had ruled with 15 votes to 4 that the criminalisation of homosexual acts in Northern Ireland was a violation of human rights, and that was in respect to the person's right to a private life without interference by public authority. Homosexual sex between 2 males was then decriminalised a year later in Northern Ireland, a year before David Norris lost his appeal to the Irish Supreme Court. David Norris losing his appeal came in between 2 very big moments of gathering in the Irish gay community. The first being the Stop Violence protest after the suspended sentences of Declan Flynn's murderers, and in June, the first gay pride march in Ireland. Taking inspiration from the case in Northern Ireland, David Norris launched an appeal to the European Court of Human Rights following the decline of his appeal in the Supreme Court in Ireland. After 5 years of fighting, the court found that the Irish law was in breach of human rights, just as it had done for Northern Ireland. However, unlike in Northern Ireland, which decriminalised its homosexuality prohibition laws just a year after the ruling, the Irish government, as always, dragged its feet. So while Norris had won the appeal in the late 80s, homosexuality wasn't decriminalised until the 1990s. A year before David Norris won the appeal with the European Court of Human Rights, the Dublin gay community suffered a further blow when the Hirschfield Centre burned down on the 5th of November 1987. The cause of the fire was unknown. Many thought it to be the cause of an electrical fire, others thought it to be a malicious attack against the gay community. Whatever the cause of the fire, it was a devastating loss for Dublin's gay community, although thankfully the records and archive that had been established as a community resource in the Hirschfield Centre was saved. And Tony Walsh, who was a prominent activist and member of the Hirschfield Centre, established the Irish Queer Archive in 1996. I will link this article from the journal.ie talking to Tony Walsh regarding the burning down of the Hirschfeld Centre in the description below. In 1993, the Minister for Justice, Myra Gagan-Quinn, brought a bill that would decriminalise homosexuality. The bill went through its due diligence, through the Oireachtas, and then on to the President to sign. And in a kind of full circle moment, the President at the time was Mary Robinson, the barrister who had represented Norris in his case, and also an active supporter of the gay rights movement from the 1980s. In March of the same year, Dr. Lydia Foy, a trans woman who wrote to the Irish Register General to get her correct gender updated on her birth certificate, was denied her request. She would go on to fight for 2 more decades for gender recognition in Ireland. I'll speak more about gender recognition in a minute, but further progressive moves that happened in the 1990s included anti-discrimination laws coming into effect in 1998, which covered discrimination in employment. So you could no longer discriminate against people based on their sexuality and a number of other things from 1998. However, this did only cover employment. It didn't cover schools or hospitals run by religious institutions for another almost 20 years. Going into the 2000s, a High Court case in 2007 found the state to be in breach of its positive obligations under Article 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights for failing to recognise Dr. Lydia Foy as her correct gender on her birth certificate. And still, by January 2013, Dr. Foy was still fighting and on her 3rd set of legal proceedings against the state, fighting for recognition. In November of 2014, she finally settled her case and the Irish government published the Gender Recognition Bill on the 19th of December of that year. I'm going to briefly go back to the 2000s a little bit to talk about the fight for transgender equality in Ireland, which is still ongoing, but I want to give a little bit of a background on it. So the Transgender Equality Network of Ireland, or TENI, was established in 2006. And then in 2007, the European Commissioner for Human Rights, Hammenberg, had stressed the obligation of states to adopt a system to recognise trans people and their genders. Ireland was the last country in the European Union to recognise the legal status of trans people. And this is despite the 2007 ruling stating that that was in opposition to human rights. The High Court ruling in 2007 really stressed the need for Ireland to introduce legislation for this, and they still didn't quite do that until almost a decade later. Still in the noughties, in 2008, the Irish Queer Archive was officially adopted into the National Library of Ireland archive. On the 16th of June 2008, the Irish Queer Archive, which is an enormous community archive of newspaper clippings, videos, pictures of the rights campaigns and cultural materials showing the history of Ireland's queer community. The transfer of this from their community base to the National Archive really was both literal and symbolic. The Irish Queer Archive was established from Gay Community News and the National Lesbian and Gay Federation, and for years it was a community-led effort to archive, collect and preserve the information and history of the queer community in Ireland. Because of its status as a community-led archive, it was a counter archive of sorts. It was a counter culture, counter mainstream culture, in that it had information and kept information that was counter to the stigma and discrimination that was being seen in the nation at large. And while on a legitimate level, it was an archive in its own right, the adoption and integration into the main National Archive lended further legitimacy, authority and recognition that it previously did not have. Moving into the 2010s, in May of 2010, the Irish government set up a gender recognition advisory group to start working on legislation for the Gender Recognition Act. This is just 3 years after they've been found in breach of human rights, but you know, who's counting? For the following 5 years, the right to self-identify and have gender recognised for trans people was debated, drafted, redrafted, redebated, revisions were made, drafts were published, open forums were held, specific revisions were made to be inclusive of intersex people, having a pathway for legal recognition for 16 and 17-year-olds who weren't quite of age, as well as removal of the prohibitions of trans individuals participating in sport, a topic which 7 years later is somehow up for debate again in the news. That list is not completely exhaustive, but just to give a couple of examples of the types of things that were being revised and made sure to be included or not included. And then finally, on the 3rd of June 2015, it was announced that trans people in Ireland would be able to self-identify and self-declare their gender identity with no requirement from a medical practitioner. And just over a month later, on the 15th of July, the Gender Recognition Act was passed. This legislation allows individuals to declare and self-identify their gender and also to gain updated official documents with their correct gender declared, including birth certificates. While 16 and 17-year-olds also were included in this legislation, the process for them doing so is more complicated. I will link below to TENI's website, which has a lot of information about the Gender Recognition Act and the history behind it and the fight for it, as well as linking to a copy of the Act itself. And backtracking just a little bit to a couple of weeks before the Gender Recognition Act was announced, on the 22nd of May 2015, after years of campaigning, Ireland legalised same-sex marriage. And not only was same-sex marriage legalised, it was legalised by popular vote, making Ireland the first country in the world to do so. Winning with 62% of the vote, same-sex marriage was legalised, and thousands of people gathered at Dublin Castle to hear the vote count and to celebrate the win. This really was a historic day in Ireland, considering how far we'd come from 50 years before, when that campaign to decriminalise homosexuality had really started in earnest. There was still 38% of people that voted against this, and there was still a very insistent campaign against same-sex marriage, saying it would destroy the sanctity and remove the importance of heterosexual marriage, which it doesn't. However, in a kind of hilarious turn of events, we did almost criminalize heterosexual marriage. Yep, because in Ireland, our first official language is Irish, Gaeilge, we have to write our laws and our legislation not only in English but in Irish, and the Irish language version takes precedent. So due to the grammatical fun of the Irish language and plurals in the Irish language, the Irish language version kind of could have been interpreted as just legalizing marriage between two men and two women, as opposed to including same-sex marriage. Now, in saying that, Irish law does have a clause generally called the absurdity clause. So if something seems like it is completely absurd, then it can be disregarded. However, it is still kind of funny and up there with the time that the government accidentally legalized lots of Class A drugs for 24 hours. But that's a story for a different day. So despite all the progression that I've gone through and that Ireland has gone through in the last 50 years on LGBT rights, for the past few years, we have been seeing a rise in bigotry. And this is not just being seen in Ireland, it's being seen across the globe, and it is being seen in the kind of circles of right-wing conservative, Christian and evangelical types of groups and funded by those groups. We have also seen hate speech being given mainstream platforms in Ireland, and subsequently we are seeing a rise in violence against the LGBTQ plus community, as well as other marginalised groups in Ireland. Now, this type of bigotry and hate speech and violence has never gone away. but it's concerningly on the rise again. And it can be really disheartening to see the progress that we have made between 1975 and 2015, and to then see what seems like steps back being taken. And this is why we can't get complacent about fighting for and maintaining our rights. And there has been a notable rise in US conservative rhetoric in Ireland, specifically since the Repeal the Eighth campaign, which was repealing that legislation that I mentioned previously in 1983 that was introduced to ban abortion in Ireland, a decision that was overturned by popular vote in 2018. And since then, we have seen a rise in right-wing extremist views in Ireland. While they're not quite mainstream, they are still being given platforms in mainstream media. And in particular, during the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen a rise in this kind of rhetoric. And also in similar veins, we have seen the rise of conspiracy theories and hate speech. Earlier this year, in 2022, there were targeted murders of gay people fueled by homophobia in Ireland. And just this last weekend at Dublin Pride, 3 people were attacked in a transphobic attack, leaving one of them in hospital with a fractured skull. And this attack was done at 10 to 7 in the evening, in broad daylight. Not to mention, I have been seeing lots of reporting from individuals online who had been verbally harassed on the streets of Dublin following the Pride celebrations earlier that evening. All of this is also happening just a week after our national broadcaster invited people on to debate, and I use the word debate very lightly here, but they invited people on a national popular radio show to debate trans people's rights to participate in sport, and in doing so gave 3 days of a platform to transphobic, hate-filled rhetoric. You can read more about this in an article that I will post below that was written by activist Izzy Kamikaze. The article talks about the recent anti-trans campaign from an anti-trans group who call themselves the Countess, after Countess Markovich, and I will be talking about that organisation in future videos. But Izzy Kamikaze does a very, very comprehensive breakdown on exactly where the origins of this organisation come from and the type of ties that they have to right-wing extremist views. And Izzy herself has been campaigning for LGBT rights for decades in Ireland and was at that 1983 protest in Fairview Park after the murder of Declan Flynn. I will, as I said, link that article in the description below. I would highly recommend you read it to see just how pervasive this type of anti-trans and just general bigoted, hate-filled campaign are done and how they infiltrate mainstream media. I'm also going to link an article by Brian Hughes that was recently published looking at the science behind transphobia and asking why are transphobes so transphobic. In July of 2018, the Irish Council for Civil Liberties posted a report and an article on hate crime in Ireland. And despite the fact that this report highlighted just how much transphobic, homophobic and racist hate crimes were in Ireland, 4 years later, there is no existing hate crime legislation in this country. And on the note of crimes against people, conversion therapy is also still legal in Ireland. So if you don't know what conversion therapy is, according to WebMD, conversion therapy is any emotional or physical therapy used to cure or repair a person's attraction to the same sex or their gender identity and expression. Providers claim these therapies can make someone heterosexual or straight, but there is no evidence to support this. In extreme cases, the practices may be violent or torturous. Conversion therapy is sometimes called reparative therapy or ex-gay therapy. Just this weekend, at Pride celebrations in Dublin, our Taoiseach, Head of State, Micheál Martin, committed to working towards banning conversion therapy in Ireland, and the government has also committed to attempting to address the hate crime issue and the lack of legislation around it, as well as the absolutely ridiculous wait times for trans healthcare in Ireland. Last year, Gay Community News published an article that found that under the Freedom of Information Act for gender services in this country, waiting times for the Irish National Gender Service could be up to a decade. That's just not good enough. So yes, in one sense, Ireland has come a very, very long way from the 1970s. We now have gender recognition, we have gay marriage, we have decriminalised homosexuality, but we still have a long way to go. And that's all before we even get into the lack of transgender youth recognition and services, recognition and inclusion for non-binary and gender fluid people, full inclusive adoptive rights for LGBTQIA+ parents, inclusive and equal sex education in schools. There is just so much to do. And as I said, with the rise of bigotry, homophobia and transphobia in recent years, and particularly during Pride Month as well, it can sometimes feel like we're going backwards. But I hope this video and this timeline, while not fully comprehensive of every single thing that has been done along the way for LGBT rights, has outlined just how far the community has come, and also how important it is to continually fight for your rights. I cannot stress it enough. And not only fighting for your own rights that pertain to you as an individual, but fighting for the community at large. So before I go into a full-blown rant, I really do hope you've enjoyed this video, you found it informative. And if you do want to learn more or go into any further detail of anything that I've covered here or touched on, I will leave, as always, all of the resource links down in the comments below. I am planning to do more videos on real revolutionaries, Irish women in history, specifically looking at some gay and transgender icons from Irish history. So if you liked this content and liked this video, let me know by giving it a thumbs up, drop a comment down below and let me know if there's something that I didn't touch on that you would have liked me to cover in the video, or if you have any suggestions on future videos that you'd like to see me do. You can find me on social media. I am on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter. And if you know anybody that could benefit from learning about the history of the LGBTQ+ community in Ireland, share this video with them, share it on your social media. Also feel free to throw any links or events that are coming up for the remainder of the summer, particularly if they're online events, in the comments below, and tag me in them on social media and I will absolutely share them. So, Gurv Mila as Chalk, thank you very much for coming. Agus Slongafol, I will see you soon. Also, the Irish for Pride is road. You may see this in all my videos in the background if my head's not blocking it, but that is the Irish for Pride.